Hello everybody and welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you're new to the channel or you happen to enjoy this content, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button so we can continue to grow this channel and bring you more videos like this one. Let's go. So today we have a Rook endgame that occurred between two very strong Grandmasters. With the white pieces we had Vugar Rasulov, and with the black pieces we had Christopher Yoo. Now they played this position in Title Tuesday on March 25th, and this is actually almost an exact replica of a Rook endgame that we have already studied on this channel before, and I'm going to be including the link to that video in the description below. The drawing method here is the same. The idea is the same idea as applied to this position. Christopher Yoo here with the black pieces is actually defending this Rook endgame, which in theory it should be a pretty simple draw for the black pieces. Now I do want to point out that both players were very low on time already in this position, so a lot of these moves were almost pre-moves, which is the basically the main reason for some of the blunders that we're going to see. But still, this is a great example of why it's so important to know these Rook endgames and how common they appear in practice. So this is a pretty epic battle between the two players. This is already on move 88, and in this position it is Christopher Yoo's move, and he goes with Rook to A4. Now we've seen this idea many times from the defending side, that the Rook wants to go to the far side or the long side of the board or the pawn, right? So Rook A4, the correct move here, and now Rasulov responds with Rook to G7 check, and we have an absolutely wild blunder here. Christopher Yoo goes with King to F8, which is losing on the spot. Of course, the drawing move, and we've seen this idea many times, the king has to go to the short side of the board with King to H8, and after King H8, we're going to see here the draw is very simple. Now, the video where we had covered this drawing method was where the attacking side has pawns either on the B file or the G file, and they couldn't quite reach the pure version of the Philidor position, which is the one that achieves a draw. This is exactly what we have here, and in that video we saw how the idea was just through passive defense, right? The Rook is going to drop back to the 8th rank, and basically the attacking side can't make any progress, and we're going to see actually how that works here in practice. So after King to H8, white wants to go Rook to G6. Now very careful here. If you're the white pieces and you get a position like this, don't go King takes G6, because that's going to blunder the Rook after Rook A6 check. You have to go King F7, because otherwise King takes here, right? And then we have Rook A7 check. And nobody's sponsoring this guy here on G7, so it's pretty much game over. It would be a very tragic way to lose. Instead, we have Rook takes G6, and we're going to see in following, right, with the drawing method, how easy it is to draw this position. So after Rook A8, black is just going to keep this configuration here with the king on G8 and H8 and the Rook on the 8th rank. Rook H6 check, King J, and I'm just going to go pretty quickly through these moves because this is already a position that we studied, and it's fairly simple. As we can see, black's plan is just staying on A8 and B8 back and forth, and there's not much that white can do. Remember, the checks were always going to go to the short side, so King to H8, and white is going to try a little maneuver here. We'll bring the pawn to the 7th rank and try to bring the Rook around and check on H8, right? But then as soon as the Rook drops back to H1, we have Rook B6 check, and this pawn is going to fall off the board, and it's a draw. So as soon as white tries to do any sort of maneuver where they're going to make progress, black has this defensive idea with Rook B6 check, and in the meantime you could just keep your king on G8 and H8, and the Rook is going to stay on the 8th rank. So very simple, very simple drawing method there. However, after King to F8, black is completely losing in this position after King takes G6 incredibly enough, in this position, white did not play king takes g6 and instead went with rook f7 check, and then after king g8 and some accurate moves, and we'll go into the endgame a little bit later on how it actually happened, but Christopher Yoo was able to hold on to the draw. But let's just take a look here. We're going to make a little bit of a deep dive into this position after king f8, because this is already losing for the black pieces, and we're going to see why. So again, the winning move, king takes g6, not rook f7 check, allowing the drawing configuration again. Black has a few attempts, and they're going to all revolve around ideas that we've already seen before, defensive ideas. The first one is going to be attacking from the far side. The second one is going to be dropping the rook behind and trying to attack from behind. And the third one is going to be with passive defense, bringing the rook over to the 8th rank. But we're going to see in this position, none of these ideas are going to be enough to draw because the king is not where it's supposed to be. So let's start with rook a6 check. So after rook a6 check, we have a move here which, again, we've already studied, we've already seen. That's king to h7. This move is actually important, so I'm going to go ahead and annotate it here with an exclamation mark. Good move. And here, black is almost already running out of ideas, right? So we have rook to a1. Of course, you don't want to go king h8, right? And then this is kind of where, when I mentioned at the beginning of the video, where this is almost an exact replica of the position which we had studied. And that position, the pawn was a bit more far advanced to g6, and in a position similar to this, the attacking side goes with king h8. Here, though, it doesn't quite work. So you don't want to go king to h8 because you have rook h1 check, and after rook h7, rook g1. How do you make progress, right? If you try to step back to defend the pawn, king comes to f7, king to h7, and you're just going to stay put there on the g file with the rook. So not much you could do here. If the king goes to h8, then the king just steps in to g6, and the g5 pawn will be falling, so achieving a pretty easy draw. But instead of king h8, we do have here a very important move, rook to g8 check. And a couple of options here for the black pieces. Now we have king f7 and we have king e7, right? So the idea of going to e7 is if you go to f7, this pretty much allows the advance of the pawn with gain of tempo. Okay, so you have g6 check, king f6, rook f8 check. The idea is that we're trying to kick the king away from the pawn as far as possible. King to e7, and now we have g7. Now after rook h1 check, the king comes to g8, rook to h2, and we're going to see here a very, very familiar idea. Rook f4, preparing to create that bridge along the 4th rank here, which we've seen so many times is a winning maneuver in these types of positions, right? So rook comes to h1, and after check, it's pretty much game over, right? King f6 and king f8, and the pawn's going to be advancing. Now if you try to go king d6, and we've seen this many, many times, king to f7, rook f1 check, and that just checks continue until we can finally block here with g4. So it's for that reason that black can attempt here after rook g8 check, they can go with king e7 to not allow white to gain a tempo, right, with g6 check. As the white pieces, you're going to go g6 anyway, rook to h1 check, king g7, rook to g1, and rook a8, right? Clearing the way so that we could try to advance the king and the pawn. Now, of course, the defending side isn't going to make it that easy, right? They're going to maintain the rook here on the g file so that you can't go king g8 and you can't go g7 without dropping the pawn. But very, very simple here. There's actually two winning methods. You could go king h7, right? And then we're going to push the pawn and go king g8. Or if you like, you also have rook a6. So you have rook a6, king e8, king comes to g8. And that's the thing, is that black is pretty tied down here. They're running out of defensive ideas to try and draw the position. The rook is going to maintain itself on the g file to try to exert as much pressure here as possible. But very simply, white is just going to go king h7. That's the idea in this position. So king h7. And very nice little trick here to always keep in mind is you have g8 queening the pawn, because if rook takes g8, now you have rook a7 check, and this rook is going to be dropping off the board. Okay, after king to f8, you have rook a8 check, and once again nobody's sponsoring the rook here on g8. Now instead of king f7, let's go back here a little bit. You could try rook h1 check, but that's kind of the idea of bringing the rook over to a6. It's not just to defend the pawn, but also to create that bridge that we've seen so many times in these positions where we have pawns on the B and G files, is that you could actually create the bridge along the H file here, because the defending side is running out of board to the short side. So this is pretty much game over as well. The pawn will be queening very, very shortly. So basically, that pretty much cancels out rook a6 check as a method to try to defend, right? But we have a couple of moves left here. We could take a look at rook a2, and we could take a look finally at rook a8, right? Which is the defensive idea if the king were on the right square. So what happens, for instance, if black goes with rook a2? Now, this is it's a kind of like a combined idea, right? We can either attack the pawn from behind, or we could try to give checks from the side, from the far side. Okay, so in this position, white goes ahead and goes rook to b7, clearing the way, right, to try to start advancing our pieces. And black basically has two attempts. Like we said, they could try to stay on the side of the board or behind the pawn, right? Behind or to the side. So if they were to go rook to g2, we have rook b8 check, forcing the king out of the 8th rank, king to e7. And this is another idea which we've seen many times, where the attacking side brings the rook over to the front of the pawn with the idea that we want to defend the g pawn so that we could start moving our king up the board without having to worry to drop this pawn, right? So rook to d8, king e6, rook e8 check. Very, very strong move. The idea here is once again kicking the king farther away from the pawn, because we have the opposition. So the king really has no choice but to go further away with king d7, and the king is cut off. So now the rook drops back to e1, and you guessed it, we're going for a Lucena position where the king is going to go up to g8, the pawn's going to go to g7, and we're going to create the bridge here on the 4th rank, right? And how does this look in practice? Very, very simple. King d6, king to h6, rook h2 check, and this is all moves that we've seen before, right? Now, this is also an idea that we had discussed in one of our last videos, where because the pawns are on the B and G files, the 4th rank isn't the only place where we can create this bridge. We're going to see positions where the defending side tries to bring the king over to the 5th rank, to our 5th rank, its 4th rank, to prevent the rook from coming here and creating the bridge. But because we have one of our knight pawns, we could go rook to h1, and now the king is going to step to the side and the pawn is just going to move forward. Okay, so bringing the rook over to g2 does not work. The win is very, very straightforward. And let's go back here a few moves. We had rook b7, and here we saw rook to g2. So the other attempt the defending side could go for here is rook to a8. Again, pretty straightforward. There's no pressure on the pawn, so we can try, or we could start to advance the king to exert control here over the queening square. So we have king to h7. Now the rook drops back to a1, and this is what I was talking about, the combined ideas, right, of either maintaining on the side or trying to attack from behind. And so now the rook is going to try to bother with checks from h1 and g1. A little bit too late, right? So we have rook b8 check. We've seen this idea time and time again, kicking this king out of the 8th rank, king to e7, g6, rook h1 check. The king has arrived where it is supposed to be in order to win these positions, and the rook comes over to g1, and we have g7. And look at that. We have this same idea once again. We give checks with the rook from the side so that we could bring the rook over to h6. The king steps over to h8, and our pawn will be queening. So once again, we have this very simple idea of creating the bridge over here on the h file, right? So yeah, bringing the rook over. Let's go back here to the position really quickly, not that far. King g6, we saw rook a6 check. Yeah, bringing the rook over to a8 does not work. So now, what other options here does black have? Well, they have one last attempt, and that is to bring the rook over to the 8th rank and attempt passive defense, right? We're just going to stay put here, and we're going to bank on the fact that, or what we hope is a fact, that white can't make any more progress. But in this position, that really isn't the case. Once again, because the king is not on the short side of the pawn, it's on the far side of the pawn. So after rook to a8, once again, the winning maneuver is actually quite simple. King to h7, rook a1. The rook has to remove itself from the 8th rank, right? Because otherwise, rook g8 check would be an absolutely lethal move, just winning the rook here on a8. So the rook steps away from this threat. We have rook to g8 check, and after king e7, all these positions, right, are pretty much one and the same. The rook comes to g1, trying to pressure the pawn from behind to make it as difficult as possible for white to advance, but it just doesn't work. The same idea once again. The rook steps away, creating the path here for its pieces to advance. Rook to g2, and yeah, king h7. And we've seen this position before, right? Looks very, very familiar. So to the check, we've already pretty much seen this idea, right? Many, many times already. So another move that black can attempt here is king g5, and although it changes things somewhat, the result is never in question, right? So after king g5, white wants to go g7, threatening to queen very, very quickly. Now the idea of this move is we're going to make it a little bit more difficult for the white pieces. We're going to harass this king. We're going to try to keep it on g8 so that the pawn can't move forward. But after rook h2 check, king g8, rook b2, we see this idea. Now we're going to start harassing from the side. We have rook to a1, king g6, rook g1 check. And if you think that this idea is to create the bridge over on the h file, you guess correct. After rook b8 check, king to h7, and rook b7, preventing the pawn from advancing, right, pinning it to the king. But we have rook f1 check and king h8. And it's pretty much game over, because if you go rook b8 check, we can cover with g8 queen. And we have a very simple position here where white is just going to deliver checkmate with the rook. And there's quite a lot of variations there, but to be honest, the ideas are all pretty much the same. So it's going to be the same winning method. And it's just that black has a lot of attempts here in this position to try and hold the position, but none of them really work, because once again, the king stepped off to the wrong side of the board after king to f8. Now, we've already seen how simple the draw was after king h8, right? Which is going to be the same idea that we've already studied, because we're on the short side of the pawn. The rook drops back to the 8th rank, and we're just going to stay put there. Passive defense works in this kind of scenario. Now, I just want to go through the moves of the game really quickly so that we could see how it ended. After rook f8, we have, after king f8, we have rook f7 check, and then king g8, we once again have a draw. In this position, you have to go rook f6, right? Because otherwise, you're going to be dropping the rook. And from here on out, we see that black achieved the draw very, very easy. Now, again, in this position, it would have worked to just bring the king back and sit tight here between g8 and h8 and bring the rook over to the 8th rank. Christopher Yoo finds another drawing method, which Frankly, I believe is a little bit more complicated. But the truth of the matter is that white can't make any progress. And this is kind of the idea, even though it's not an exact Philidor setup, it's the same idea, right? That the rook attacks the pawn from behind, and then when the king just steps in to try to defend, we have the check, right? Of course, the blunders that we see here, right, are in no way representative of the true strength of these players. Both of these players are very, very strong grandmasters who no doubt know these rook endgames very well. But sometimes when you have these positions in time pressure and basically you're just forced to play on the increment, a lot of crazy things can happen. And thankfully for that, they create these very interesting positions where we could go ahead and look at and study and learn a lot from. And as always, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.